October 7th, 1943. Somewhere over the Bismarck Sea, at 22,000 feet, a single Lockheed P-38 Lightning rolls into a 45-degree dive. Ahead of it, not behind it, not below it, ahead of it, a formation of 12 Japanese Zero fighters. The standard play, the textbook play, the safe play, is to climb, to disengage, to use the P-38's altitude advantage and pick off stragglers from above. The pilot does none of that. He points the nose directly at the lead Zero, head on. Closing speed, over 500 miles per hour. At that closure rate, both aircraft have less than 3 seconds before they either collide or one of them breaks. His squadron mates, watching from a distance, later said it looked like a suicide run. It was not. The Zero broke left. The pilot anticipated it. He was already correcting. He fired one 2-second burst from 4 50-caliber machine guns and one 20mm cannon. The Zero disintegrated before it had finished its turn. He didn't watch it fall. He was already lining up the next one. By the time this man's career in the Pacific ended, he had destroyed 40 confirmed Japanese aircraft in aerial combat, making him one of the highest-scoring American aces of the entire war. He had done it flying one aircraft. He had done it using a tactic that his own instructors once called reckless, unsound, and tactically irresponsible. And he had done it in a theater so brutal, so remote, and so forgotten by the American public that many of his missions were never properly documented until decades after the war ended. This is the story of Major Thomas Buchanan McGuire, Jr., and the cold mathematical logic behind the attack that everyone else was afraid to make. To understand what McGuire did, you first have to understand the machine he did it in, and the machine he was fighting against. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning entered operational service with the United States Army Air Forces in 1942. It weighed 17,000 pounds fully loaded. It carried a payload of firepower concentrated in the nose, not spread across the wings like most fighters of the era, which meant every round it fired hit the same convergence point at virtually any range. That nose armament consisted of 4 50-caliber Browning M2 machine guns and one Hispano 20mm autocannon. The theoretical rate of fire from that combined battery exceeded 4,000 rounds per minute. At 400 yards, a 1-second burst from a P-38 delivered roughly 67 rounds onto a target. Against an aircraft made primarily of aluminum and fabric, that was enough to end the engagement. The P-38 also carried 2 Allison V-1710 engines. 2 engines mattered enormously in the Pacific. If one engine failed over open ocean, and engines failed regularly in that theater, in that climate, under those maintenance conditions, the pilot had a chance of reaching land. A single-engine fighter pilot did not. The P-38's range, extended by external drop tanks, reached approximately 1,000 miles on a combat mission. That number was critical. The distances in the Pacific theater were unlike anything American pilots had faced in Europe. From Port Moresby in New Guinea to Rabaul, the main Japanese air and naval base on New Britain, the distance was roughly 550 miles one way. A pilot flying a P-38 on a Rabaul mission was airborne for 5 to 6 hours. He was cold. He was cramped. He was scanning for enemy aircraft for the entire duration. And when contact came, he had to fight at peak efficiency after hours of physical and mental exhaustion. Now consider what he was fighting against. The Mitsubishi A6M0, called the Zeke by Allied intelligence, was the dominant Japanese carrier-based and land-based fighter of the early Pacific War. It weighed roughly 6,000 pounds. It could turn inside virtually any Allied fighter it encountered in the first 2 years of the war. Its turning radius at low and medium speeds was so tight that American and British pilots who tried to outturn it in dogfights routinely died for that mistake. The Zero's range exceeded 2,000 miles. It had been designed to project Japanese air power across the vast distances of the Pacific. And it was flown, particularly in the early war period, by pilots of exceptional skill. Men who had spent years flying combat missions in China before Pearl Harbor. The men McGuire would face were not amateurs. Many of them were veterans with hundreds of hours of combat time. Some had been flying since 1937. The fundamental problem facing American P-38 pilots in 1942 and early 1943 was this. In a turning fight, the Zero won. Not sometimes, not usually, reliably. The P-38 was heavier, faster in a dive, more durable, and far better armed. But if an American pilot allowed a Zero to drag him into a slow, turning, low-altitude dogfight, the kind of fight that European air combat training had prepared many of them for, he was at a severe disadvantage. The Japanese pilots knew this. They trained for it. They waited for it. And in the early months of the Pacific Air War, American pilots gave it to them. The losses were severe. The United States entered the Pacific War with one structural advantage that no amount of Japanese pilot skill could overcome: industrial capacity. In 1942, the United States produced 47,836 military aircraft. Japan produced 8,861. By 1944, American production reached 96,318 aircraft in a single year. Japan, by contrast, produced 28,180 that same year, roughly 29% of the American output. This disparity extended to pilots. The United States Army Air Forces trained over 193,000 pilots during the war. Japan trained a far smaller number, and critically, as the war progressed and veteran pilots died faster than replacements could be trained, Japanese pilot quality declined sharply. American pilot quality, by contrast, improved. Training programs became more sophisticated. Lessons learned in combat were rapidly transmitted back to training bases in the United States. Pilots arrived in theater with better preparation than their predecessors. McGuire himself graduated from flying school in February 1942. He received advanced training before deploying. When he arrived in the Pacific, he carried the benefit of an institutional learning process that Japan's military structure, built around the veneration of individual warrior excellence, was far slower to replicate at scale. The logistics infrastructure behind the American air campaign was also without parallel in the theater. American engineers, using prefabricated equipment and enormous earth-moving machinery, could construct a combat-capable airstrip in the Pacific jungle in as little as 30 days. The Japanese relied on slower, more labor-intensive methods. When the Americans captured an island, they built an airfield almost immediately. That airfield extended American combat range. It allowed more fighters to escort bombers. It compressed the distances that made the theater so punishing. Leapfrogging. Bypassing heavily fortified Japanese positions and cutting their supply lines was a strategy made possible largely by this ability to project air power from newly constructed forward bases. McGuire flew from these bases. His 40 kills were made possible not just by his own skill, but by the fuel that reached him, the mechanics who kept his aircraft flying, and the strategic decisions made thousands of miles away in Washington and Brisbane. The individual ace is always, in part, a product of the system that puts him in the air. The doctrine that shaped American air combat in the Pacific, and the doctrine that McGuire both absorbed and expanded upon, began with one man, Lieutenant General George C. Kenney. Kenney took command of Allied air forces in the Southwest Pacific in August 1942. He found a demoralized, undersupplied, and tactically confused air force. He replaced it with something else entirely. Kenny was a pragmatist. He did not believe in air power orthodoxy. He believed in what worked. He looked at the P-38 and he saw not a slightly inferior dogfighter, but a long-range, heavily armed weapons system that needed to be used on its own terms. His core instruction to his pilots was precise and unambiguous. Do not follow the Zero into a turning fight. Use speed, use altitude, use diving attacks. Hit, break away, climb back up. Never let the Zero dictate the terms of the engagement. Kenny institutionalized this doctrine. He circulated after-action reports that described what worked and what got pilots killed. He promoted officers who understood it. He relieved those who did not adapt. But doctrine is not the same as the individual application of doctrine. McGuire took Kenny's framework and added something that was uniquely his own: the head-on attack. Conventional fighter tactics in 1942 and 1943 treated the head-on pass as a last resort, a desperation move when an enemy aircraft was diving on you and you had no other option. McGuire turned it into a primary offensive weapon. His reasoning was coldly logical. In a head-on pass, closure speed between two aircraft reaches 500 to 600 miles per hour. At that speed, the Zero pilot has approximately 2 to 3 seconds to react, fire, and maneuver. The Zero's excellent maneuverability, its greatest tactical asset, becomes nearly irrelevant at that closure rate. A Zero cannot turn inside a P-38 when both aircraft are moving toward each other at the speed of a bullet train. McGuire also understood something about probability. In a head-on pass, the pilot who commits fully and fires first and holds steady has an enormous psychological advantage over the pilot who flinches. The Zero pilot, trained for turning dogfights, trained to dance around an enemy at low speed, was not psychologically prepared for a pilot who did not deviate. Not all Zero pilots broke. Some did not. Some fired back. Some died doing it. McGuire respected this. His squadron mates recalled that he never spoke dismissively of Japanese pilots. He spoke about them technically, their habits, their tendencies, their typical responses under specific conditions. He treated them the way a chess player treats a skilled opponent, with the respect that comes from knowing they will punish any mistake you make. He also flew differently. Where many ace pilots of the era were known for lone wolf tendencies, breaking formation to pursue individual kills, McGuire was insistent about formation discipline. He believed that individual kills achieved by breaking formation and leaving your wingman exposed cost more than they gained. His record of 40 kills was built on the understanding that survival and teamwork were prerequisites for accumulating victories, not obstacles to them. His men trusted him, not because he was charismatic. By most accounts, he was demanding, precise, and difficult, but because he was right about the things that mattered. And what mattered was coming home. McGuire arrived in the Pacific in March 1943. He was 22 years old. He had never been in combat. His first months were not immediately distinguished. He was good. He was not yet what he would become. The turning point was not a single battle. It was a process of refinement, mission after mission, engagement after engagement, in which McGuire measured what he was doing against what the results demanded. He noticed something specific. When he flew the conventional high-altitude bounce, dive on the enemy, fire, pull away, he scored kills. But when the Japanese formations were large, disciplined, and well escorted, the bounce could be disrupted by defensive maneuvers before he got into firing position. The Zero pilots had learned to watch for the diving attack. They were rotating protective coverage. They were making the standard approach dangerous. McGuire's response was characteristically direct. If they were watching above them, he would come at them from the front. If they were prepared for the high-angle diving attack, he would remove the angle entirely. He began refining his head-on approach in mid-1943, adjusting his entry angle, his firing range, his break-off point. He was doing applied physics in a cockpit. The first concrete proof that the adaptation was working came during the summer of 1943, over New Guinea. In a series of engagements over a 6-week period, McGuire recorded 7 confirmed kills. His squadron commander began paying attention. More importantly, other pilots began watching his gun camera footage. The footage showed something that was difficult to argue with. 0 after 0, caught in head-on passes, braking too late, or not braking at all. The system worked, not because it was instinctive, because it was calculated. McGuire had found the seam in the Zero's tactical doctrine, and he exploited it with the precision of a surgeon rather than the aggression of a brawler. The difference mattered. Brawlers died in the Pacific. Surgeons came home. Battle 1. The Rabaul Raids. October-November 1943. By late 1943, the Allied High Command had identified Rabaul as the key target in the Southwest Pacific. The Japanese had concentrated over 300 aircraft there. 4 fleet carriers had transferred their air groups to Rabaul to reinforce it. These were not conscripts. These were among the best carrier aviators in the Imperial Japanese Navy. Attacking Rabaul was not a training exercise. On October 12, 1943, 5th Air Force launched its first major strike against Rabaul. 149 P-38s flew as escort for the bombers. McGuire was among them. The air battle over Rabaul that day involved hundreds of aircraft on both sides. McGuire scored 2 confirmed kills and 1 probable. His flight returned intact. Not all flights did. American losses over Rabaul in October and November 1943 were significant. At least 38 aircraft in the series of strikes, with pilots killed and captured. But the Japanese losses were far heavier. Over the course of the Rabaul campaign, Japanese records, confirmed after the war, showed that they lost approximately 70 skilled carrier aviators in just 2 months. Those pilots could not be replaced with equivalent skill in any reasonable time frame. The Americans lost fewer pilots, and they replaced them faster. McGuire understood this arithmetic at the level of a mission commander. Every engagement was not just a fight. It was an exchange rate calculation. Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita, commanding Japanese naval forces at Rabaul during this period, later acknowledged in post-war interrogation that the attrition of his air groups during October and November 1943 was a strategic wound from which his command never fully recovered. He identified the P-38 escorts specifically as the factor that made interdiction attacks on the American bombers prohibitively costly. Battle 2, August 18, 1943. The day he made history. On this single day, in a series of engagements over the Huon Gulf region of New Guinea, McGuire shot down 4 Japanese aircraft. 4 in a single day. He used his head-on approach twice. He used the standard diving attack twice. He adapted in real time to what the situation offered. His total score at this point reached a level that placed him among the active leading aces in the Pacific Theater. His squadron commander formally recommended him for the Silver Star. The recommendation described his tactics as aggressive and tactically sophisticated. It did not use the word reckless. Nobody used that word anymore. Battle 3, December 25th and 26th, 1944. The Philippines. By December 1944, American forces had landed in the Philippines. The Japanese launched massive air counterattacks using every available aircraft, conventional fighters, bombers, and kamikaze units, against the American fleet and landing forces. The air battles over the Philippines in late 1944 were among the largest of the entire Pacific War. On Christmas Day, December 25, 1944, McGuire flew multiple combat sorties. He shot down 3 Japanese aircraft. The following day, December 26th, he shot down 4 more. 7 kills in 2 days. At the end of December 26, 1944, Thomas McGuire's confirmed total stood at 38. He was chasing one man, Major Richard Bong. Bong held the American record at 40 confirmed kills. McGuire was 2 behind him. General Douglas MacArthur had grounded Bong from combat and sent him home to the United States. The record was now technically reachable. McGuire knew it. He did not talk about it excessively, but he knew it. And knowing it would shape the decision that defined the end of his story. On January 7, 1945, McGuire was dead. He was 24 years old. He had flown into a low-altitude turning engagement over Los Negros Island in the Philippines while attempting to protect a squadron mate who was under attack. The circumstances of his death involved a breakdown of the very principles he had spent 2 years teaching. He was flying at low altitude. He was turning. He was flying an aircraft loaded with external fuel tanks that he did not jettison when combat began, possibly because jettisoning them would have meant abandoning his wingman. The Japanese pilot who shot him down was Sergeant Mizunori Fukuda, flying a Nakajima Ki-43 Hayabusa, a lighter, more maneuverable aircraft than the Zero. McGuire's P-38 stalled during a sharp, low-altitude turn. It did not recover. He did not eject. The P-38 was not equipped with an ejection seat. He was awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously. The citation described his conduct throughout his career. It did not explain why he died the way he did. The honest answer is that the pressure of the record created a mission on January 7, 1945, that McGuire should not have flown under those conditions. His own doctrine, stay fast, stay high, never turn with the enemy at low altitude, was violated on the day of his death. Whether the pressure of chasing Bong's record contributed to that decision, whether it was the instinct to protect a wingman that overrode tactical calculation, or whether it was simple circumstance and bad luck, no one who was there that day can say with certainty. What can be said with certainty is this: 43 American P-38 pilots were killed or missing in action in the 5th Air Force during the same period McGuire flew his 40 confirmed victories. Each of them had a name. Each of them had a file. Most of them are remembered only in those files. The theater demanded everything from the men who flew in it, and it took from them indiscriminately, aces and rookies alike. One institutional flaw in the American fighter pilot culture of this era deserves acknowledgement. The public, and to a degree the military, elevated the individual ace above the collective air campaign. Scorecards were published. Rivalries between leading aces were covered in newspapers. This attention created pressure on men like McGuire that had no tactical justification. A dead ace is worth 0 kills. The pressure to make record-breaking personal scores occasionally drove sound pilots into unsound decisions. The United States Army Air Forces recognized this problem and did almost nothing to solve it. Japan's air forces in the Pacific War could dominate individual engagements. They could not outlast a nation that produced 10 aircraft for every 1 they lost. The Zero was a masterpiece of engineering, optimized for a kind of war that the Pacific ultimately did not become. It was light because lightness enabled range and maneuverability. It was unarmored because armor was weight, and weight was the enemy of performance. It was built around the individual pilot's skill because Japan's military tradition placed the singular warrior at the center of its martial philosophy. All of these choices were rational. All of them were fatal. They could win the battle of individual skill. They could not defeat the battle of institutional scale. When Japan's best pilots died over Rabaul, over the Solomon Islands, over the Philippines, they were not replaced by men of equivalent preparation. When America's best pilots died, the training pipeline produced the next generation within months. McGuire's tactics, the cold geometric logic of the head-on pass, were a product of a culture that looked at combat not as a duel between individual warriors, but as a problem to be solved with information, analysis, and discipline. That approach did not always produce heroic narratives. It produced victory. Not quickly, not cheaply, but systematically, irreversibly, and completely. That is what wars in the industrial age are ultimately decided by. Not the brilliance of any single pilot, but the machine, the industrial, logistical, institutional machine that keeps him in the air. Thomas McGuire was from Ridgewood, New Jersey. He was the son of a father who left the family when he was young, raised partly by a mother who pushed him toward education and discipline. He did not arrive in the Pacific as a hero. He arrived as a 22-year-old with ambition, a quick mathematical mind, and a belief that survival was a question worth studying. The men who flew with him came from across the country. Mechanics from Ohio farm towns, radiomen from the Bronx, armament specialists from rural Georgia who had never seen an airplane before 1942. These men loaded his guns. They patched his aircraft. They tracked his fuel consumption and calculated his range margins, and handed him a canteen and a map before every mission. None of them are in the history books. All of them kept him flying. By the time you watch this video, the last surviving American P-38 pilots of the Pacific War are in their late 90s or beyond. Most are gone. The ones who remain carry memories that no documentary can fully reconstruct. They flew 5 and 6 hours over open ocean in aircraft with no pressurization, no ejection seat, and no realistic prospect of rescue if they went down over water. They did it because their country asked them to. They did it because the man beside them was going too. They deserve to be remembered not as statistics in a kill count, but as young men who faced an immense and violent world and did not look away. If this story matters to you, subscribe to this channel. New videos every day documenting the wars that shaped our world.